Writing is about the process. It's about listening and recognizing remnants of your story in the stories of others. When we share our stories with each other, we share the resonance of the human experience. The By Firelight podcast is your invitation to join our circle, a circle of writers, poets, seekers, and storytellers as we capture our living in words. This multifaceted living with joy, grief, love, growth, and loss is shared among us in your legacy, your story. The things you choose to do with your days as they unfold matter here. I'm your host, Betsy Delzer. I'm many things, but in this gathering, I'm a painter, poet, and writer, and I'm honored to be your guide through these episodes. Together, we'll find our muses in the rich and heart-expanding conversations with incredible guests, many who are like minds and all outrageously inspiring hearts. When you press play, you're here in the circle to share this space with us. By Firelight.
Micaela Sullivan-Fowler recently retired from the University of Wisconsin's Ebling Library for the Health Sciences, where she was the rare book curator, historical librarian, and public historian of medicine. She was also the head of marketing and communications for the library, developing a community of comfort and inclusion for students and faculty. Along with her work with the students, her favorite endeavors were the creation of exhibitions highlighting the rare books and historical collections which covered the 15th century to the present day. Micaela is truly an interdisciplinary historian, covering and discussing the arts, the creativity, the craft, and most of all, the imagination and life in each of the pages and words that she observed, curated, and now creates herself. Well, Micaela Sullivan-Fowler, this is a dream. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I love that the very first sound in the space is your laughter. I think that will probably come up throughout our conversation. But as we get started, I know you're excited about this question. And I, first of all, just want to say thank you so much for being a regular listener to the By Firelight podcast. You are one of the few in my life in circle who responds pretty frequently with the fact that I'm in your car or in your headphones and you're listening. So thank you for listening to episodes before you. I'm so glad you're here and now bringing your voice to the space.
I even made notes because, I'm a librarian.
Yes.
I thought, and then I remember when Jen said, and I remember when Emily said, and Ladros knew. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right. So
really good. So what about starting us with what you are familiar with, having been a listener? And that is the question around if your older or younger self were with us or informing us in this moment, what would she want to tell us?
So morphed as I've listened to all of the other presentations. And 2 days ago, I completely came up with it, which is, you notice an awful lot of people, the guests, mention around the third grade, 8 to 9 years old, what a teacher's impact on them was, what a parent's impact on them was, memories from that time. And I was thinking that had a really powerful impact on me too, that age and self-worth, etc. And now at 70, I hate odd numbers. Oh my God. At 70, I am realizing that everything was there at that age. Everything that's here was there at that age. And a friend recently, I was talking about the existential crisis that for me, retirement has unleashed. Yes. And I thought, wait, I knew all my truths. I knew them then. And what can they tell me now? And I thought, there's basically 6 things: books, and therefore storytelling, nature and critters and gardening, which is a big avocation, creating, from paper mache to embroidery to hand lettering to texture, love texture, the need to travel. I had a travel club in junior high where I was going to earn money by paper macheing cottage cheese containers and selling those, and then getting on a barge to Africa, going to Kenya, meeting the Maasai, etc. Holding and keeping, and eventually sharing. Because when you move a lot, I was an Air Force brat, and families fractured for numerous reasons. You try to hoard, a strong word, the bits and pieces that resonate. And I'm still doing that. And then whimsy and humor, because for heaven's sakes, how does anybody get through life without whimsy and humor? So no wonder I became a librarian, a historian, a keeper. And I think my younger self would tell this current older self to go for it. Go beyond the career, the calling, because it was way more than a career. Write the book, do a history podcast, travel, create while you still can, and share those observations and get over the odd number thing and make the 70s the most requited decade of all, because we can all keep learning and sharing. So that's what I think they all say to each other.
Oh, I love that little treasure keeper and the current one for sure.
Treasure keeper.
Yes. One of the things I was just smiling ear to ear about as I was thinking about this time with you is how we met, which is kind of funny because I don't get to meet all of my guests, but we have a fun story.
That's right.
Yeah. So I was going back in my memory bank. I want to say this must have been about 15 years ago that we met. There was like a paper posted in the window of Anthropology that basically was asking their patrons for help. and so we met across, I think it was like a card table of sorts with glue guns and plastic bags. And we were working on a giant installation in Anthropology. And I remember I was sitting with my back to the window and you were sitting facing out. And I was just taken, Micaela, by your kind of, at the time, your hair was much longer. This wild curls and this bright light in your eyes and your smile and laughter. And I remember also as we were closing, I was like, I mean, I feel like this is like a niche of mine, is to kind of pick and find really amazing people and then keep them in my pocket. So I was like, let's stay connected. And I remember at the time you're like, oh, I really don't do Facebook much. And I was like, it was still sort of new, right? Like at the time, whatever, 2010, 2009, 2010. Yeah. And so we eventually connected. And I think back to that moment, and then where we are now. And we have since, I was thinking, we've since created art together. Yes. Beyond window installations, right? We have celebrated the arts at gallery showings together. We've shared multiple circles in the writing space, and now have this whole network of friends that we share through the years that have just crisscrossed and kind of combined our lives.
We buried St. Joseph together.
Yes, we did. Well, you, first of all, in your gardening, you found him.
Yes.
And then you're like, I think you need this because you need to sell your house. And I was like, yes. Say what? Like, yes.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. I think one of the things I remember about that was there were other people at that table. And within about 20 minutes of us finding each other, they thought we knew each other. Like they thought we were already friends. And I thought, no, I just met her. But somehow it's, yeah. And that reminds me, when I was back in Evanston, which is 27 years ago now, I was doing freelance work for a little something called the internet that was going to happen. I was working with a number of consultants, and Jim was his name, and he did all these like time geography studies of how people move around in a store, what their buying practices are, etc. And I was the librarian on contract. And we would travel all over from Chicago to St. Louis on these big think tank things, which was crazy and affirming when you've got like a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old at home. And I was working at home. And at some point, I remember saying to him, why do we connect so incredibly? Our writing works well. Our segues from subjects work well. We can talk to anybody from the person cleaning the room we're in to the CEO of the company. And he said, well, the real people know who the real people are. That was true of the two of us, I'm sure, over those sequin pine cones. Here we are now.
Yeah. The real people do know. And probably, I would guess, the real people are also listening, right? That we're drawn to the same thing sometimes.
By Firelight is certainly real people. Yes.
Yeah. So I remember kind of being intrigued by your humor, your light. You have this like fairy-like living, fairy-like quality about you when you first meet, but then it's actually true. This is really who you are. And some of the things that you listed, I was like, yes, this is so Micaela. But you mentioned then, I remember, that you're the curator of rare books at the university, you said 15 years ago. And I was sort of like gobsmacked in the moment that job existed, and that then I was meeting this very important rare curator. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is incredible. And I have to learn more. So I know that there are lots of things that we want to talk about today and lots of directions we want to go. But can we talk a little bit about that era of being the curator of rare books and what that was, just maybe both like the pathway there, as a friend of mine requested I ask you about that, but also what your work and life was like there?
So first I was the clinical and historical librarian at the American Medical Association in Chicago. And that was in the heady 80s. And what that meant was I was there when AIDS broke out. I was there during Legionnaire's disease. I was there during toxic shock syndrome. I was there in this most amazing moment of medical public health and history. And while I was answering the questions clinically, they graciously paid for me to become a historian as well. So I was in a sandbox of wonderfulness of things happening, and also being able to study the history of previous public health endeavors and initiatives. And then I had my kiddos, stayed home for 10 years, kept my hand in with the freelance thing that I just told you about with Jim. And then the dream job came up, and that was at the University of Wisconsin. What was the Middleton Library became the Eveling Library. And I had worked with a lot of the people who were faculty members at UW when I was at the AMA. They would come into Chicago to do research. And I got the job. We moved here. Petey started doing freelance from upstairs while I went to work before he was the freelancer. And the children were like, Drake and Alex were like 10 and 7 when we moved here to Madison. And there was the dream job, which was the historical librarian over a collection that went back to the 15th century. That's the rare book aspect. And the collection has about 60,000 volumes. It's incredibly amazing in anatomical texts, women's health, surgery, dermatology, public health, maternity, obstetrics, etc., back to the 1500s. My greatest, I think, amazement with all of that is that because I came to it not only from an English background, as in bachelor's degree in English, but storytelling background, public history background, and frustrated artist background, that what I've done for the last 25 years is try and make all of that very interdisciplinary, which means that I've worked with printers, artists, bookmakers, neurologists, surgeons, etc., for the last 25 years, using material that's anywhere from 100 to 500 years old, inform their practice or their scholarship. And to say it's been amazing is minimizing both its impact on me and on the researchers, I would argue. It's been a blessing for all of us.
When you were thinking about this as like the dream job, did it turn out to be that? Did it exceed your expectations? What were the things that kind of kept your soul flying through the working years there?
When I was thinking about all of this, I was thinking about sort of how different my trajectory has been than most of the people that you've interviewed, or most of the people even that you might know in some capacity. And I think it's because I made it my own. The predecessor before that, I don't think did the kind of cross-disciplinary work that I did. I don't think she did exhibitions, which is one of my greatest loves with the material that I've done. I think I've done about 20 exhibitions over 27 years, and all of those have been just extraordinary in terms of highlighting the books and the journals and the photographs that we have, but also, for lack of a better thing, changing scholars' lives, which is very gratifying and speaks to one of the things that I think I just briefly mentioned in my opening, which was that every single book in that collection, every engraving, every lithograph, every hand-lettered typesetting, how physicians felt about subjects like abortion and child rearing and facial reconstruction, and all of it is so multi-layered and so interconnected. And I don't think most librarians are also historians. And so to put all of that together has been the most remarkable gift for me.
Yeah. I got to visit you a few times in the library, and the ways that the text and images and, the different sizes of the books would just sort of come alive under the cases, or sometimes you would pull them out. I can kind of picture you having like moments where, that the exhibitions that were so stunning and powerful, and the place is crowded and packed. But I also have these moments where I can just imagine you in this quiet space by yourself or with very few people around, and having, for lack of a better term, sort of a holy moment with a book or a series. Do you have a memory of something when it just really spoke to you and came alive, jumped off the page or something like that?
Yes, a lot. So an individual example would be, and this is in the current Swan Song exhibition, even though I left in December, the last exhibition I did will be there through the end of spring, mainly as bait to get really good candidates in as my successor. And I wanted them to see what kind of amazement we had in that collection. And this represents, 1/8,000th of what we have. But we had gotten a donation of a 19th century family guide, which is kind of like a Bible in a farmer's home, where you write down every time the child got sick, somebody was born, somebody died, what kind of tinctures you had given them, etc. And I open it up to page 232, and there's a pressed flower. And the pressed flower was on the miscarriage abortion page. And that was a big wow. Was this totally serendipitous that this flower was pressed in this section, or did it mean something, and to whom? And there was a graduate student, she's still working on it actually, who's looking at what we call ephemera, which are things interleaved into books, recipe cards, postcards, prescriptions, theater advertisements, whatever, usually used as bookmarks, but not necessarily, and then left there when the donors dropped them off. We had a 45-minute conversation about what that flower might mean pressed in that place to a 19th century farm woman, essentially. That was huge and hopefully revealing for her. The second one probably is, so the exhibition before the last one was Staggering Losses, World War I and the Pandemic of 1918, which opened in November of 2018 on the 100th anniversary of the armistice, and then had the odd status of being shuttered by our own epidemic. And the last paragraphs in my curator statement, which sits on top of the display, was that infectious disease people had suggested that if we had another epidemic, that it would make the 1918 epidemic look like child's play in terms of mortality, morbidity, etc. There's a lot, we could do 2 or 3 hours on that. The point is we closed down on March 15th, 2020. We all went home to be safe for a very limited amount of time, which turned out not to be so limited. And the whole exhibit stayed in the display cases. And I was the only one that went back on site because I had to check on my vault, make sure the humidity and temperatures was correct. I couldn't really work from home because nobody would approve me bringing home my 17th century Vesalius in the kitchen and scanning pieces or, hand coloring it or something. And so I would go in, and these were my people for a year. The soldiers, the nurses, the horses, the surgeons, the people who lost their faces, all of the players in World War I became the people that kept me company while I was there. And there was one extraordinary case that a lot of people talked about, even now, 4 years later, who saw it. There was an ambulance driver named Vincent. He was also a musician. Another ambulance driver named Leslie, and a nurse named Mademoiselle. She was anonymous. They all wrote journals and/or books about carrying the dead off the battlefields, carrying the men out of the trenches, this most extraordinary care, emergent care, triage care, etc. But Mademoiselle loved music. Vincent played the violin, and Leslie was always hiring these musicians to be the bearers of the bodies out of the trenches. And I had put a map in of France and all the places where the ambulance drivers would go. And it was mainly to churches that had been repurposed for the dead or the dying. And while I was putting all this together, which was from 14 disparate sources, it occurred to me that they could have met, that Vincent could have played in one of the churches, Mademoiselle could have gone to listen, and Leslie could have hired Vincent. And so it became like a storyboard out of these remarkably separate but very original pieces that resonated from journal descriptions. And I would talk to them while I was in Yo, Vincent, how you doing? Mademoiselle, whatever happened to you? Yeah, extraordinary.
Did you ever sense answering?
Oh, damn, yeah. Always. Yes, one must. Because really, somehow I think history and the spirit that runs through things that are written like that. And that's why I did Swan Song, which is a love letter to essentially the bodies, the patients, the doctors, the donors who made my job the most extraordinary career that I could have had. And so, yeah, I think when you read those passages, like the woman in the Farmer's Journal, etc., you send out sort of a cosmic ping, and then you remember for a minute. And I think that's pretty astounding. Yeah.
It really is. It's amazing, and we'll get to your writing too, but just your storytelling and the way that you shape your words, it evokes something inside me. It always has, as a listener of your writing, but also as just your friend. And as you were talking about the ephemera and the flower, I was thinking of my own experience with miscarriage, and it's like, this is, I think, what you had an incredible ability to do was create a space that, like you said, has things from antiquity and make it somehow relevant and relatable to the life that we're living and the time that we're living in. And I just want to share because I know that you are a treasure keeper and all the more confirming in this conversation. But I have to tell you this story that I've never told you before, and certainly I haven't told the podcast. So between Coco and Jet, my two kids, I miscarried a baby. It was one of those things where, went for the 8-week and saw the little heart flicker, and then went for the 12-week. And I think I was right around 13 weeks and it was just a void. The light was gone. And, from that moment, my doctor actually, I was at a small practice. She was so loving and attentive. And she really was able to kind of say, based on what I can predict here, you could pass this baby at home or you could come into the hospital. And, being one that doesn't really care for hospitals, I was like, okay, well, I think I'll try this at home. And, I spent several days doing what a body must do to release something that's no longer thriving in your body. And there was enough matter that I decided I wanted to bury part of my loss. And so I had this like little box and I created like a little coffin for burial. And I think we even put some words and some things inside of it. And then we had this big magnolia tree in our backyard. And the magnolia tree, we called it the love tree because the former owners of our late 1800s farmhouse had planted it as an engagement gift to one another. And then when they moved, they wanted to take it, but the landscapers said it was too much earth, right? They couldn't take it. So she said, you get to enjoy this. And it went from like kind of a small bush to this giant tree, right? But it always bloomed with a steady rhythm annually where it would come up and it would just do its gorgeous thing in hot fuchsia magnolia blossoms in May. Okay. So fast forward, this is the heat of the middle of the summer. It's in July. And, I of course, because this is just kind of how I roll, I made some sort of ritual around it. I remember it being dark. I dug the hole before the dark, but then I wanted candles and I wanted Coco to be asleep and so that she could just miss all of this, right? And that my former partner and I could have a moment with this burial. So we did that. And, there was a lot of just, I want to say to anyone listening for whom this is like creating a connection or a memory, there's a lot that a body and a heart goes through in loss like that, right? And so I remember just kind of patting the earth as we filled it back in and knowing that this little part of my body was now underground. Well, the next day, we are in mid-July. I am upstairs and I look out and across the top of the magnolia tree are tiny hot pink buds.
In summer?
In summer.
Wow.
And not all over the tree, across the top of the tree. And here's even better. They never opened. They stayed these buds and they were tight. But I would look out the window and I remember having kind of a fall to my knees moment of like, oh, right. Like, oh, we are held. I am held. This life is where it needs to be, was my experience of like this kind of cosmic connection of a reminder, right? And anyone listening could be like, oh, well, I kind of read into this differently, or this is what a magnolia tree might actually do, or just blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, great. And for me, it felt like a hovering of another realm so that I could do my grieving and releasing. And then, it was for years that this tree would, I want to say for the next 2 or 3 years, it was just over the top. And in July, right around that time. And we've since moved and life has changed and our children are grown and we're no longer together, that sort of thing. But I remember that as like a beckoning of spirit of mine and something beyond. So thank you so much for that reminder. I haven't thought of that story in a really long time, but as soon as you were telling that, and this is what you do and have always done so well, is that you tell a story and it pulls something up from under the surface. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I do have one more question related to the curator life, and then we can move into a little bit more. I'd love to talk a little bit about your love story, and I'd also love to hear some of your writing and talk about writing, right? That's what we're here to do, of course. But, we're doing this time dance with older, younger self, etc. And you shared kind of this idea of what your younger self kind of had all along, and that this is what you're reminded of now. This is what we are reminded of now. If you were to kind of look inward at where you are right now and think back to Micaela starting this position, right, when it was just beginning, are there any words of advice from this vantage point now of looking back before you started your career at the University of Wisconsin? Would you give her any advice or say, "You got it, girl"? What would you tell her as she was starting out?
I think there's a really rich dance, I would suggest, especially with people your age, a little bit younger, a little bit older, especially within the Spill group, because most of you are under 50. There's a few of us over. And one of the other things I was going to say about my younger, older self, now that I'm going through all of those things that were kept in my home and also kept at work, and then in 65 boxes brought from work over to home, plus my mother's stuff, plus my children's stuff, etc., in my home. And I'm now trying diligently to declutter and downsize and categorize, etc. My husband, Pete, even said, well, when people want to know what you're doing during retirement, you can tell them you're unpacking from 1998 when you moved here. Because as soon as I got here, I had a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old and a full-time job and sports and mom and, all that. And I never truly moved into my house in some fashion. And if I was in my house and the weather was nice, I was outside, or we were traveling to see the other grandparents, or we were at a soccer match. And I never really got to be in my house. And one of the things I would suggest is staying a little leaner as you go through your late 20s, early 30s, 40s, 50s. Because now it's becoming clear to me that there's a burden in some of this, that I thought I would always get to it. All the knitting, all the embroidery, all the seashells, all the acorns, all the stories. And I don't know what the answer is to find balance. And who doesn't wrestle with that in whatever decade you're in? It's your job, it's your students, it's your freelance, it's your children, it's your partners, it's the world, it's the travel, it's the money. I either wish I could have cloned myself so I could do all of it, or maybe paid a little more attention to me rather than to my calling. But it was such a calling. I mean, to me, I was one of those monument men. I mean, I was there to protect something, share something that there's only like 100 of us in the country, these curators of rare books, medical books. There's other curators, but was that more important than tidying, travel, extra children things? I don't know. I'm wrestling with an awful lot of this. That's the existential crisis I referred to at the beginning, because, oh my gosh, Bets, one does get older and not quite as robust physically, or exhausts a little more easily. And I'm thinking, I don't need 15 shoe boxes of seashells and acorns from 1962 in California, but I could still create something. And that leads me to I think I thought I need to come up with an acronym. Because at 70, then you're supposed to have some degree of wisdom, perhaps, and advice. And I thought, okay, so this is the new one. And am I answering any of your question? Probably not.
You absolutely are.
My goals. So for those of you who are just spring chickens, no matter what decade that is, it would be perspective, which is, and especially in the times we're in, et cetera, I think I have the really unusual gift of having historical perspective as a trained historian. I mean, to think this way, to think there's always two sides, there's always whatever, there can be heinous acts like wars, etc. But look how incredibly resilient we all are in some capacity. And the pandemic really brought that home for me, especially because I had studied the history of it. But to have perspective, to listen, to see that everything has potential. One sentence, one prompt. I mean, you know that as our prompt extraordinaire in Spill with one line and what it can evoke in a poem, in a short story, in a photograph, etc. And chocolate. I am such a big sharer. I'm such a big caretaker. I mean, one of your people was it Karen Rigsby. She said she was a recovering perfectionist. And God, so am I. Oh my goodness. Because everything had to be perfect. And that's in part why I have all these piles and all these undone things and all this is because it had to be perfect. And that's, a German mom story. And the caretaker, I was always the caretaker at my house. The other person that I'm thinking of is Dana, who suggested that people like me, people like her, from high volume dysfunctional families become hypervigilant, know how to read every room they walk into, and that sometimes, gosh darn it, it might not be any of our business. And we're really good at it, but it's exhausting. And I did that at work. I mean, it wasn't only the books that I cared for, it was the students. And when you work with medical students, farm students, nurses, the level of anxiety and stress is phenomenal. And I made sure that they were safe in our library. And whether it was Trader Joe's peanut butter cups or blankets or hand lotion or whatever, to me, that kind of kindness transcends everything. How do you do it all? How do we do it all? I mean, sometimes I think that I appear to be an extremely well-functioning adult, some level. And that's the whimsy and the humor. And Pete, I mean, Petey, you've met Petey. He keeps everything in perspective with his humor and his knuckleheadedness. But I mean, sometimes I think I'm the maddest, most annoyed, pissed off person that I know, but that's not my demeanor. That's not my job. I am here to take care of stuff. And I wonder if I'll take that into my retirement too, or if I'll get a little more selfish. I don't know. And yet one could suggest I've been really selfish because I've done exactly what I wanted to do, which was this extraordinary calling. And how many people get to do that? You do, I believe, as an educator, as a yogi, as an amazing friend. But it's a lot. And I don't know if I need to do it differently for the next decade or two.
When I think about just kind of the zoom out and the decades, I think I might have mentioned this before, at least in person, if not on the pod, but I really kind of attach a theme to the decades. And I have watched my parents age, and then I have tried very hard to keep mentors around in 10, 20, 30-year increments older than me to kind of help guide, right? But I often think about what a slow descent looks like in my aging. And so, like, for an example, last year, I was interim administrator. And when I was asked to step into the role mid-year because of a need that was present in my new job, I I said yes because I felt like, okay, I am in my late 40s and this is my ramp era. Like, I'm still, as far as my career goes, I'm not ready in the ways that I've thought of my decades thematically to dial back, right? I am here. I'm willing to put in. And now I will say, like, looking back at my 30s, I had a lot more energy for the generation of ideas and the chase and the verve that was really necessary for kind of some of the entrepreneurial things I was doing. But now, I feel like the work presents itself in the way that it fits best. And I'm willing to work a little extra hard knowing that I've got another probably 10 to 15 years before I'm willing to say, I want to spend a little bit more time at the typewriter, or I want to spend a little bit more time on the beach, or I want to spend, so when I hear kind of some of your wonderings and the sharing, I can't imagine a Micaela that didn't, number one, hear the calling, and number two, step into it as gracefully and wholeheartedly as you did. The things that you said that your younger self holding, keeping, and sharing, you're absolutely right in that there are people who don't get to experience the fullness of purpose, passion, and that interconnectedness of those things. And that is something that is so true for you. You had the scholarly aspect and the passion, you had the art and the exhibit. And I think that that's something that as you adjust and acclimatize to life after the office and the library, it'll emerge for you in the way that makes the most sense, if that makes sense.
You'll be okay, Bets.
You'll be okay. You'll be more than okay. And you already are. Babe, you're already made. That's one of my lines. Babe, you're already made. So you mentioned being a frustrated artist. I just want to talk a little bit about your visual art and some of the things that you've dabbled in and tried, and maybe something that you're dreaming of. And then let's go into your writing, because that's another form of your art. So is there anything that you're currently exploring or thinking about down the long, short road of creating?
I'd like to get back to oil painting. I started doing some oil painting when the kids went to college, and I've done a couple of commissions, dog portraits, cat portraits, which are really fun. But I find oil painting absolutely transcendent and transportive, mainly because, as you know, the color that you end up with didn't come out of a tube, because you're mixing the brushwork, the gradations of color, the shadows, the reflections. I remember when I first started doing it, Cynthia Quinn was my first teacher, who's a local amazing, now fabric artist, I believe. I remember saying to her, I'll go in with, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about fill in the blank? It's so complicated. And an hour and a half later, after mixing and brushwork and standing back, and I would go, oh, I know, I call this person, I do this, I do that. So you had this remove while you were creating that actually added to your ability to take care of whatever it was that was bothering you when you started the painting. And I'd love to get back to that. Hand lettering is huge for me. I've never actually done calligraphy, but I do crazy cool hand lettering and penmanship and handwriting and envelopes and little critters and greeting cards and stuff like that. And people seem to really get a kick out of those. So I'd like to do a bit more of that. And embroidery. I'd like to get back to embroidery. I did the half of the back of 2 jackets. So I'm thinking, and I have a bigger, lumpier physique than I had when I was 18. So I think I might cut out the pieces from the old Levi's jacket and maybe put them on my new Levi's jacket in some kind of rich embroidered thread action. I don't know.
I love that. I can see it already. I really can. So I can't wait to see it in real life.
And then there's the gardening. I mean, that's, arty too in its way. I think of them as rooms, living rooms, like there's perennials and then another room and then another room, lots of bees and butterflies and that sort of thing. So, yeah. And you're so good at the flower thing too. I mean, I loved making bouquets when my mom was around. It was great.
I would say I'm much better with the cut flowers for sure. once they're cut. All right, so let's find a little bit of time with your words. So you've picked a few things that you would like to read. Before we go into reading, though, I'm curious. Have you been writing all the way along? I know as somebody who's a curator of books, you would imagine that you have kind of curated your own historical text. What was your writing life like kind of historically, just in a nutshell? And then where are you now with writing?
It's always been there, mainly journaling. I think probably more drawing when I was like junior high kind of thing. I also had a couple of like a college professor, et cetera, in creative writing class that sort of poo-pooed what I was doing and wondering what my authentic voice was and things like that. And that threw me off for a couple of years. I remember one of our other presenters suggested that you can be talked right out of writing too, a heavy critic or whatever. And that happened to me a couple of times too. But I always, with the journaling, I did everything from, the Anne Lamott sort of thing of putting 18 different notes on napkins and greeting cards and note cards and whatever, and thinking you're someday going to make a great poem or a story out of it. I've done the Julia Cameron thing, an hour a day, but who has an hour a day? I've done lots of sort of prompt things with other teachers as well. I remember one of the things that I loved hearing as I was coming into feeling like I was developing a voice, was developing a bit more as a writer in the last 3 years or 2 years since I've been with you, was Jen saying to me at one point, have you been writing a lot more? Like the practice of it meant that it was becoming almost more like breathing and organic and expected, like brushing my teeth. I'm going to write today. Da, 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 da. And you really do come to an amazing fruition when you practice writing. And for me, it's all observational. I would argue, and you could address this too, that my writing is quite a bit different than most of the people in our group. And I don't know how to categorize that. Some of it's expository, like my history writing. Some of it's observational, free verse, prosy stuff. Some of it's, and I think one of our other lovely women said, when are you going to write a novel? And I thought, really? Because it's observations. I love nothing more, and this I do miss from not working full-time or from retiring, is the bus. My bus rides and my walks through the hospital. You can't have more layered narratives and drama than bus rides and hospital stays. I just like to capture people and what they're wearing and what they're saying and little bits of amazing dialogue coming out from the seat behind me and then sort of developing that into a story.
Yeah, you really do have a gift of not just observing and telling the story, but also creating a seat on the bus or a seat next to you for the listener, right? Like we're really transported into the experience itself. And that's, I think, the piece where you kind of have us all with bated breath of waiting for what happens or the next turn or where you're going to take us in the story, because we're on a journey with you, right? We're not just watching, we're actually there and experiencing it viscerally. So
see, it's so affirming. Wow. Thank you.
I'm so excited for you to share. So do you want to read a little bit right now? Do you have anything about the bus?
I don't have anything about the bus.
It's okay. I'm sure whatever.
But I do have. I thought I'd read just one little piece from the Swan Song curator statement, just about that whole potential and possibility thing. and the flower pressed in the book, etc., because this pretty much exemplifies my hardwiring core. So this is from the curator's statement from Swan Song, Adoration and Thanks for All Who Made This Possible, which is the exhibition that's still at the library right now. I found that nearly every book, journal article, advertisement, book plate, acknowledgement, artifact, binding, broken leather cover, marginalia, graffiti, photograph, flapbook, colophon, wormhole, or inscription had the potential, the possibility of eliciting a question. They also provided artistic and scientific evidence, offered conjunctive elements between disciplines, and importantly, what remained to be discovered or investigated. They could, in short, provide the question, as well as often the answer. This abiding serendipity of discovery became my sustaining mantra. So that's kind of in a nutshell why I did what I did and what I had to share, which is pretty amazing. And this quick short one from the World War I exhibition, God, it was powerful. So amazing. My goal, so this was Staggering Losses, World War I and the pandemic of 1918. My goal was to bring renewed attention to themes and events that happened 100 or more years ago. My mission was to appreciate millions. 17 million Americans died in World War I, 50 to 100 million from influenza, just insane amounts. Through the mention of a handful, in memorializing a few of the poets, the wounded soldiers, the tireless nurses, the intrepid doctors, and the determined horses and other animals, we can honor the individuals that fought in the trenches, the fathers, daughters, sons, and mothers that were lost or cared for others. To acknowledge the grief and loss that our fellow citizens suffered reminds us of our shared humanity. We should never forget the singular individuals that contributed to the larger theater of care and hard-earned resolution.
Beautiful. Yes.
So that's a kind of expository historical description and writing, and both of those came from 2 pages worth of curator statement. In terms of sitting on the bus with me, but it's not the bus, it's Chicago, I'd like to read a piece I wrote just recently. Okay, and it's called When Traveling with Poets. Bring an umbrella, curiosity, cash, and an inexhaustible enthusiasm for all things edible. Buy a hat festooned with tiny cascading rhinestones and a pom-pom on top. Purchase a piece of focaccia as big as your head, topped with a lava flow of sautéed mushrooms. Notice that the woman at the pastry counter has the most divine boot-length coat imprinted with an unexpected polar bear pattern, sophistication and whimsy in equal measures. Her chignon hairdo, festive hooped earrings, and classic brimmed hat provoked you to suggest that that was just how you thought you'd look when you grew up. Blonde, like Betsy, fashionable, and slightly aloof. In fact, you are naturally curly, auburn-haired, wear nothing that matches, but somehow all goes together, and you wear your heart on your sleeve. Learn that the Art Institute has a counterintuitive policy. Properly wrapped triple crema brie can be brought into the galleries. However, foodstuffs may not be checked with bags and coats. You remain mystified by the whys and therefore in the rich exchange with the student staff. And you go see the Roman statues borrowed from the first time ever in America, Trolonia collection. I love this. Discover that there were nearly as many statues as people in Rome during its heyday. Imagine shopping for supper in 4th century Rome, its marble population providing a landscape of beauty and speechless companionship. Venture further into the museum and absorb Pan-African art created from the anguish, trauma, beauty, and dream of leaving, perhaps returning home. Admire the reflection of the Chicago skyline in the beam as the rain comes seemingly from all directions, rendering you as wet as a rat as you arrive at the restaurant, where taxis and Ubers drop off suited men and high-heeled women. And without a reservation, you nab the best table in the house in a secluded corner where you could see the dinner theater unfold and hear the shake of the martini maker and anticipate the crusty bread and hope you saved room for the world's tallest, tartest lemon meringue pie. And then you head home, the wind buffeting the van, racing the storm, driving straight into the biggest sun set in recent memory, the same sun witnessed by Marcus Aurelius and Cleopatra.
Oh, I remember when you read this to our group and I could taste the meringue and then you showed us pictures of it. It's incredible, the fashioning of words. And I'm thinking about right now, you pay such close attention, right? Like you pay such close attention, but it's not just paying close attention. And I don't mean just like, your focused attention. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the savory mixed with the whimsy, mixed with the layer of your intellect. I mean, there's so many things that make Micaela, and your writing. But I'm wondering, if you don't mind just speaking to it between pieces. I don't know if you have anything left but to read, but I wonder sometimes about a listener who either hasn't started writing or has dabbled with it, or just the person who has us on and life is feeling a little just, the shine is gone and the dull is present. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on keeping that imagination alive, because it feels like one of the things you do so well is create and curate the story in which you are living. And this is exemplary of it, as just this idea of how you tell the story of a dinner and a city and a museum, and we all have Brie in our pockets all of a sudden, right? What advice or what insight would you have to somebody who is feeling a little just like muted and they want to find that imagination or spark again?
Well, first of all, give me their phone numbers. And they'll become part of, I don't even know if you know this. So about 3 years ago, when I was enmeshed in my elderly mama's care, somebody said to me, "So what are you doing about following your dreams?" And I said, "I don't have time to follow my dreams. I work full time. I'm with my mama, family, friends." And I thought, there's got to be a way to globalize what I do in terms of the care that I was talking about. If you're not in front of me, so I can't give you a Trader Joe's peanut butter cup. And so I came up with, and this I'm sure is not original, dreamettes. And dreamettes are usually when I was on site, they were when the students would come into my office and have a cup of tea or something, and that was a little dreamette. Or just personally, just getting a latte and just sitting with it for 20 minutes and reading a chapter in whatever book you're reading. Just this little blip of self-care, self-time, once a day, something tiny. Even a dryer sheet in a pillowcase that makes it smell better, just a dreamette. But what I started doing was doing it with people with texts. And it was either a quote from something, very much like the prompts that you give us, but usually it's a photograph. And it's literally like a photo of the French toast that you made for breakfast, a fuzzy photo of a crocus coming up, a picture of one of my grandchildren. And you just send it to that person who you know is having a hellish day, or not even a hellish day, just a day. And there's generally no explanation. It just says, "Thinking of you, love ya, kiss, kiss, hug, hug." And there's probably about 30 or 40 people I do that with, mainly students and family people. And I think you can do that with writing, because the thing is, each one of those could be an invitation to write something as well. And I think one of our lovely guests by Firelight talked about the free writing, where you just sit down and write for 5 minutes on whatever. And I think maybe that's a nice lead in if we have a minute. I looked this up. These are what I call my awesome titles of unwritten poems. I love the titles I come up with, and I never have time to write all of this. Okay, so I'm just going to read them really quickly. Everything's a landmine. It started with a typeface. Please resist touching. Nana's sugar water. Borrowed time. Raised amongst addicts. Mama's last tissue. Family photos. I make people's days. Don't tell my husband. Provenance. And my last one I wrote the other day, becoming my own worst enemy. You could go off on any of those, and you may never. And they're napkin notes, essentially. But like Anne Lamott, I have endless notebooks, journals, old card catalog cards, which you've gotten a few of. Just write it down and then take them. I don't know. I can change my mood in a minute, in a heartbeat. I mean, I could be really dark if I needed to be. If you looked at my whole background, be like, why is she so fucking happy all the time and optimistic, et cetera, because I choose to be. There has been great loss. There's been all sorts of loss and layers of loss. But I'm not to hallmark it, but it's that 5 things I'm grateful for every day. And the Dreamettes do that. And if you share them, I think it legitimizes them even more and gives them power to somebody else to take a little energy from them or with them as well. So that's my Dreamettes.
I love that so much. I think the visual that was coming to mind as you were sharing the titles is this concept of napkin notes, and thinking about this summer, we have some destination spills that are happening. And I was thinking, if people just took those titles and we, made a list of them, and then I'm already imagining like chopping them into individual pieces and then sort of putting them in a basket or a glass of some kind. And then people pick it, right? They pick one. And if they don't necessarily resonate with the one they chose, they pick another, and they begin, and they just begin writing on that. There were so many things. Borrowed time, right? The mother's tissue. Don't tell my husband, right? Like there's so many things that I could think of really spending time allowing just the ink to spill. And that's what we do. And so I asked you kind of what helps the imagination come alive, and you answered it in such a beautiful way. But then you also gave us something really tangible that I think people can try, and they could take that list that you shared of titles and just begin, right? Don't overthink it. Just let it flow.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to read or share, or is there anything that we haven't talked about that you were hoping I would ask?
Well, one of the things that I love the most about you is just your inclusion of all the us's, all the ages. You work with students, you work with grown-ups, you write with grown-ups, you have people who are of advanced ages as your friends, etc., which I've learned in spades being at a university. I mean, I got to just the most blessing, generous thing of being a confidant of 20-something-year-olds, which is just a dream. And I was watching a film with Nancy Silverton, who is the founder of La Brea Sourdough in California, and she's a chef. And her big thing is hanging out with youngsters, 20, 30, 40s year olds. She's my age. And I thought, well, shoot, this intergenerational thing, which is not, as America is going these days, it seems, with ageism and whatever else is going on, is so richly useful for storytelling, especially if you listen. And my big thing, besides all my other big things, is listening. And it's so important. to the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings, et cetera, all of us. But that would be one of my life observations, is have friends of all the ages, because everybody brings something to the table. And supposing that it only comes from a certain voice is really limiting. So make new friends of all the ages, get their phone numbers, send them photos.
Right. And play out the dreamettes with them. I love that so much.
Yeah.
Micaela, it is, as always, from the very first time we met and your sparks were flying over the hot glue at Anthropology.
The pine cones and the sequence.
Yes, to this shared space with microphones and headphones and the writing. I am giving you 100% props for also the number of times you integrated other previous By Firelight guests. I don't think anyone will ever be able to.
Can we just say about, help me not mispronounce his name, Lodro? The new one
Lodro.
Yeah. And his eulogy quality. Oh, that statement about how do you want to be remembered, by your resume quality or your eulogy quality? And I know you spoke at one of the recent By Firelights about writing your own obituary years ago, and which is an incredible experience. I've done the same, and I wrote my mother's, which was quite revealing. But to think about what you want your legacy to be as a eulogy, rather than just tick off all the things you did, is really stunning.
I think that's what we're both doing, right? We're both living into the eulogy qualities when we are tenderly connecting. And there isn't one of us, that even somebody like yourself who has stepped into your highest calling in a line of work, who doesn't have days when we are wondering if this is what I should have done, or if this is what I should have been, who I should have been. And right, if we kind of, I love the reminder of that part of Lodro's interview, but also where we currently are in real time, that you and I can be grounded and assured that we're living in a legacy of a tender, open heart, right? Yeah. Cheers to that, my friend. Thank you so much for adding to this collection of stories. I'm so glad. I've been so excited and looking forward to this. And you just lit the path truly for our listeners. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Do we get to have wine now?
Yes, indeed.
By Firelight is a Lit Path Studios production and is produced by Jamie Gale and Betsy Delzer. Music is by Legito Music and Pond 5. Thank you for being a part of our beautiful collection of stories.